Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This is Mind Your Banners Live for Sunday, December 8th, 2024. He's Mike Niziolek from the Movies and Herald Times. I don't know how many people are going to get Mike. I mean, it is NFL Sunday, but we figured we'd do this live because I imagine at least some people are thinking, talking, digesting all they can about IU football officially making it into the playoff. Hoosiers are what? I can't do this. What are they? The 9 seed, but the 10, the 8 seed, number 8 ranked, but the 10 seed. Is that right?
They weren't the 9 seed. That's all I know.
No, I was trying to leave with their ranking, and then I was saying seeding. Anyway,
they're not the 9th ranking either. Boise State was the 9th ranking.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they're the 8th seed. 8th seed.
They're the 8. They're the number 8 team and the number 10 seed.
10th seed. Yeah. Start it over.
Indiana is the number 8 team in the college football playoff selection committee's final top 25. The number 10 seed in the field because of the bracketing procedures. The Hoosiers will play at 8 p.m. Friday against in 2 Fridays from now, December 20th, in South Bend against number 7 seed Notre Dame for a chance to go to New Orleans and play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. This is obviously a first blush look at Notre Dame. We will podcast between now and then more about this game, but we did want to kind of dig into some of the early storylines. And I guess the first thing I have for you is no real surprise for Indiana. I think it was clear the committee had made up its mind. Indiana was comfortably in the field. We actually saw them bump up a couple of at least, I think, one spot in the rankings, but not in the seeding because of the way the automatic bids work. The committee clearly thought, whatever anyone sort of, monologued about on ESPN, that Indiana deserved to be in the playoff, and so Indiana is.
Yeah, I guess the only surprise I have is sort of, I think part of the criticism of Indiana has been obviously their schedule. Their non-conference schedule is really weak, but in terms of who they played in their conference schedule, and I felt like as I was kind of going over things last night and sort of making my final prediction, which was Texas, I felt like a lot of the arguments applied to Texas. I mean, their SEC schedule was really weak outside of, they played Georgia but lost to them twice, and then Texas A&M. They played 3 of the bottom 4 teams in the conference, didn't play any team outside of those 2 that I named with a winning conference record, and then yet somehow they ended up as the 5 seed. So I'm not really sure how they jumped Penn State. I guess they weren't.
I was surprised Texas was ahead of Penn State, given also the way those 2 games went. I thought Penn State was impressive against Oregon, and Texas, struggled even against Georgia's backup quarterback, couldn't move the ball, couldn't hold on to the ball, frankly. I was surprised they were ahead of Penn State.
And so I was kind of surprised. I thought it was a sort of a coin flip between Notre Dame and Texas, and I thought that since Indiana's kind of been punished for many of the same reasons, kind of when you look at Texas's resume, and then they lose a second game against Georgia, that, for consistency's sake, it would have made sense that Texas would have been 7, but obviously that didn't happen. They get Notre Dame, and I think, we'll get into the game preview later in the week, but if you're looking just first blush, this was probably one of the better matchups that Indiana could have hoped for, like how to match up against a team.
Yeah, so, let's talk about it. There is some real strength on strength here. Notre Dame is one of the best rushing teams in the country. They have probably the best rushing threat quarterback Indiana is going to see this season. Certainly, I think Indiana has seen this season in Riley Leonard. Leonard's rushed for 721 yards and 14 touchdowns. And then Notre Dame's got 2 really good running backs, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Jeremiah Love, I think, is number 2 in the country in overall PFF grade. But they both have Love's rushed for 949 yards. Price has rushed for 651. Love has 15 rushing touchdowns. Price has 7. They both average more than 7 yards a carry. They've both popped off runs of 70-plus yards, so they've got some explosivity to them. And that's against an Indiana team that, as we have talked about many, many times, has just been excellent against the run this year. They're number one in the country against the run. They're one of only 8 teams. I'm looking at the numbers now, that have averaged under 100 yards per game allowed. And I mean, like, you can split hairs a little bit on this stuff, but like, they're number one, and it's not particularly close in the sense of yards per game. They're the only team allowing fewer than 83 yards per game. The only team in the country that's allowing fewer yards per carry is Ole Miss at 2.3. Indiana's at 2.46. They're top 10 in rushing touchdowns allowed, right up there next to the Ohio States, the Tennessees, the Michigans, the Penn States. Even teams like Iowa that maybe are obviously not very good overall, or not as good overall, but are very, very good defensively. And I mean, this is especially, it's looking kind of cold. The long range forecast doesn't have snow in it, but anybody who's spent time in Northern Indiana will know that can change in an instant. If this game does come down to one where the team that handles the ground game better wins, then it really is going to be strength on strength between Notre Dame and Indiana.
Yeah, and you kind of look at, it's hard to know what to make of Notre Dame. I mean, obviously they've rebounded. I mean, from out of the playoff field, that they probably had the worst loss out of, I don't know, maybe Arizona State, or I haven't looked at it closely at their resume.
No, I think Notre Dame probably did. Yeah.
Yeah, probably the worst loss of the field. Obviously, they bounced back. They've won 10 straight. How do you kind of rate that schedule? I'm not sure. Probably the best win is against Army and maybe Louisville or Georgia Tech. I think
it's A&M. It's A&M.
Well, I'm saying during that 10-game win streak, like.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, Georgia Tech win got better.
Yeah,
might be Army. Yeah.
But they've beat up on a lot of lesser teams too. I mean, Stanford, Florida State, Virginia. I mean, it's not like a who's who here of teams. So I mean, you kind of look at their numbers. I mean, they've obviously statistically right up there with Indiana and a lot of the sort of top scoring offense, top scoring defense, and things like that. But I don't know. I've never been overly impressed with Riley Leonard. I think he's more of a, obviously you mentioned kind of the dual threat, but passing, I don't think he's going to win you a game with his arm. So, I mean, if you can get out to an early lead, that probably helps Indiana. I mean, you look at his numbers, they, comfortable with him, throwing only around 22 times a game. I mean, not a ton of, just not flashy, obviously. I think more workmanlike, and is, I think Indiana's got the better offense, to be honest. I think more well-rounded offense, I guess I should say.
Yeah, no, I think it's likely Indiana. I mean, certainly, yes, Indiana has the more balanced offense, and you don't know how the weather's going to affect a game like this. I think the difficulty if you're Indiana is, number one, again, you've not seen a quarterback, I think, that is so comfortable hurting you on the ground the way Leonard is, and this offense is very much built. It's not like, these yards, these touchdowns Riley Leonard's getting, they're not freelance. I mean, the offense is built to run the ball. If you want like just the raw statistics in terms of rushing offense, Notre Dame is 10th in the country in yards per game on the ground. I'm trying to find they're third in the country in points per game scored. Now, as you point out, that is a little bit, a function of. That's a little bit of function of who they're playing, but they're still putting up some big numbers. I mean, if you look at, that 10-game win streak, it's 66, 28, 31, 49, 31, 51, 52, 35, 49, 49. Once they get going, they are difficult to stop. They're not like a crazy good team in the red zone, which sometimes you see teams that run the ball tend to be really, really good kind of in red zone situations. But they're like a perfectly adequate team on third downs, especially when they get into the more manageable third downs as you'd expect. Actually, they're not. They're 87th. I was misreading that. I think I caught somebody else higher up the list and thought it said Notre Dame. I did not get to bed till late because of the Big Ten championship game. I apologize. But in general, I just think, on the one hand, like, Indiana has been outstanding stopping the run all year. Frankly, even in its loss to Ohio State, until that Trevion Henderson run, Ohio State wasn't really hurting Indiana. They were getting some yards, but they weren't like tearing Indiana up at any point, rushing the football. But I don't think Indiana's seen a team that is as dedicated to kind of like the idea of a comprehensive run game as Notre Dame is going to be yet this season. And that is where, when you look at their personnel, you look at how explosive their backs are. Again, it's a quarterback in Riley Leonard that is very comfortable kind of marshaling an offense that is kind of all about running the football as effectively as they are. And then if you look at, long scrimmage plays, they have their share. They're not amazing, but they have their share that they tear off of, they're one of the best teams if you really talk about the big explosives, 30 plus, 40 plus, et cetera. I just think it is, again, this is where it feels a little bit like strength on strength. I just think, this is probably the best run defense Notre Dame's seen all year too. But it's a challenge that Indiana hasn't quite had to get ready for in just how much Notre Dame is going to embrace controlling the game physically and running the football.
Yeah, I think what's encouraging, one thing that could be encouraging for Indiana is like, look, one of the numbers that's like the most misleading for Notre Dame stats is they have the third passing defense in the country. They've only allowed 157 yards per game. But two of those games have come against Navy, a team that only attempted 150 passes this year, and Army, a team that attempted less than 100 passes. So those numbers are like very, very skewed, I feel like. And obviously faced a Purdue team that doesn't have a passing game.
You even want to dig like further, like Georgia Tech is a very run-heavy team.
And so but my point is, so last week they faced USC, more inclined to pass the ball and just let loose. And Louisville, another team that has a more effective passing attack, the defense has struggled. They gave up 360 passing yards to USC, 3 touchdowns. Louisville had 264, 3 touchdowns through the air. I think that'll be an interesting chess match because I don't think, a lot of these teams will give them much lessons learned in the passing attack that IU is going to throw at them, especially with obviously their talented slot receivers, how they go against the middle and try. And I think they, if they can open things up like they have, most of the season, with the exception of really the second half against Michigan and the last 3 quarters against Ohio State, I think they're going to be able to score some points. And I think that'll be the focus. I think you're going to see them probably go through the air a little bit to try to test the secondary that, just frankly, has forced a lot of turnovers. 17 interceptions. But again, not a ton of, great passing offenses there on their games, teams they played.
No, I think that's fair. Again, I would even dig like a level deeper, and you'll find some of the teams that generally speaking, even aren't maybe like the obvious, like Notre Dame. Everyone knows Notre Dame and Navy run the ball a lot, but again, like you pointed out, Purdue really doesn't have much of a passing game. Georgia Tech is not really a passing team. That's very much kind of a power run team and a spread offense. And Notre Dame, it's funny because they do feel just a little bit kind of like a sum of their parts up front. Now, not overall, they've got some really, really good players at the back end, obviously led by Xavier Watts, who's one of the highest graded safeties in the country. But, they've got Riley Mills has 17 sacks. They've got 6 players with between 1.5 and 4 sacks behind him. They have pretty pedestrian tackle for loss numbers. They've got solid sack numbers. They are not – I guess what I'm trying to say is on paper anyway, and obviously I have not watched a ton of Notre Dame. On paper, they are not quite the team in the tackle box that Indiana has struggled with when we're thinking about Michigan, when we're thinking about Ohio State. Like, yeah. I don't know that Notre Dame's got guys at the quality of a Cody Simon or Tyreek Williams at
Ohio State.
Ohio State, thank you. And then obviously the Michigan, Mason Graham and TJ Guy and Kenneth Grant and yada, yada, yada. I don't think Notre Dame's got that really. And so it's more kind of, I think, because Notre Dame is, it's worth saying, one of the nation's leaders in both interceptions, and I think they have the most interceptions returned for. They are tied for the most interceptions returned for touchdowns in the country. They have a really, really good secondary.
They have the best. They have the second best turnover margin in general. Indiana's one behind them, but second best in the country.
But it's kind of a little bit strength on strength in the sense that you felt like a team that Indiana was going to struggle with in these first round matchups was going to be a team, at least the more obvious matchup Indiana might struggle with would be a team that would look around the line of scrimmage the way Ohio State and Michigan looked. Profile wise, Notre Dame doesn't necessarily look like that. Now, the difference, or the other side of that coin is Notre Dame is outstanding in the secondary. Notre Dame is very disruptive and creates a ton of turnovers and opportunities in those settings. But it is a little bit kind of strength on strength again, where Notre Dame, may not be quite as capable of controlling the line of scrimmage against Indiana and leveraging what looked a little bit like a weakness for Indiana against high-level opposition, kind of in the trenches inside the tackle box. But Notre Dame might also look at some of what Indiana does well and say, well, we're, at times we've been good at stopping that, or at least we've been good at creating enough mistakes, enough turnovers, enough change plays that, hey, if we have to win the game 42-30, we will, but we can, and we have before.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I mean, Indiana has not been a team prone to those mistakes this year. I mean, they've really gone out their way to avoid them. Curtis Rourke has been really smart with the ball. What is it, 4 interceptions total? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Tied for fewest in the Big Ten, and I think on more pass attempts. So.
Yeah, and I mean they're leading all the efficiency ratings in the passing game. So I mean, he hasn't made a ton of mistakes. So I mean that's a good sign when one of the ways Notre Dame has thrived is off those mistakes that Curtis Rourke just hasn't made this year. But I feel like we can get more too into this breaking down the game later the week. I'm curious just your perception of the matchup. Is this I feel like we mentioned kind of came down after the conference title games to Texas, Penn State, Indiana. Do you think this is one the fans will be the most or are the most psyched about, or do you think they would have preferred to face an SEC power? Like, how do you view this match?
I don't know how psyched they're going to be when they see that a room at the Fairfield Inn in South Bend is $2,100.
Did you see the ticket prices are over $1,000 each? It's going to be hard to get into the game. I mean, it
is going to be very hard. You're going to need to know somebody who knows somebody. I think there's, the Notre Dame, Indiana football and frankly basketball dynamics have always been a little bit curious to me. Like when Digger Phelps was at Notre Dame, there was at least kind of this like friendly rivalry. He and Bob Knight were close and they played a lot. And, Indiana obviously, I think, won more of those games historically, but Notre Dame was always a real thorn in Indiana's side, beat them a few times, some meaningful wins. Football really has never, there's the old reversible jacket line, and I still contend that I've lived in the state a long time and I have not met a reversible, I've not met very many genuine reversible jacket fans. These teams have only played once since 1958. Now they have a series on the books for, I think,
on paper,
2030 and 2031. Yeah. But if you look at the history of this series, they have not played since 91. They have not played, they've only played once since 1958. And I think I'm looking at it while we're talking here, Indiana's 5-23-1, 5 wins, 23 losses, 1 tie. That's 29 total games. 21 of those games were played before 1950. 19 of those games were played, or I guess 19 of those games were played before Indiana entered World War II. This has never been a series that really had any juice. And Notre Dame has always kind of stood apart, right, culturally in the state. A a long time ago, somebody pointed out to me that Indiana and North Carolina are the only two states outside of Texas, I think Texas and California, that have more than two Power 5 football programs in them. But like the difference between Indiana and North Carolina is IU and Purdue are kind of just like, I don't know, normal essentially. But Notre Dame has always kind of been its own thing. It's always had a more national profile. Obviously, it's a private institution and a religious institution. My point is just it's never, you know, for all the reversible jacket talk, like it's never really felt like the sort of cultural identities of these two programs clashed very much at all. And
you don't think there's any, like, you don't think there's pent up hostility about being the sort of
maybe some. I listen. I know IU fans that just wanted this because they think they can beat Notre Dame. I know IU fans that wanted this because they do have genuine Notre Dame fans in their family and that kind of thing.
But if I'm asking you to, so would you say that there wasn't more, like, it would be more like, this isn't far away, like the most exciting matchup for IU fans, like that there is a contingent that might have wanted to play in the SEC and not try to take down Texas? Like, how do you rate them? That's what I'm asking. And said a lot of words. You're not addressing my question.
I mean, I feel like I'm addressing it as best I know how. I don't know. I mean, maybe if you polled IU fans, there is more pent up hostility than I think there is. I've just never thought about like Indiana and Notre Dame as it's certainly not a rivalry. And I don't think it's ever been one, certainly not in the modern era. Again, like the majority of the games these two programs have played happened before Pearl Harbor, you know, there was a time, I'm sure, when it was a little fiercer, and probably in no small part simply because college football had to be more regional and you had to play more of the teams around you. I think that's also why Notre Dame and Indiana played a lot in basketball, was just because at that time the idea of, you know, flying to the Bahamas for 3 games was a little bit more anathema to kind of what we're talking about. I just don't. Indiana has never seen Notre Dame as a rival in any sporting context, other than like maybe specific instances when they were pursuing a recruit or playing in one kind of game. But like, for example, when I was a sports editor at the Indiana Daily Student, one of the rules that we had on the sports desk was you had to remove the word rival anytime Indiana was playing a team other than Purdue or Kentucky.
I've described them as this in-state foes, not rivals.
And that is, I think that was our preferred go-to, foes, because we get a lot of like,
they're not rivals. There's no rivalry. Yeah, absolutely.
In-state rival Butler, in-state rival Ball State, in-state rival Notre Dame. It's not a rivalry. I'm sure, I have no doubt that there will be some, you know, pronounced sort of like interfamily, you know, back and forth around this, and that there will be families that'll have Notre Dame fans and IU fans and whatever else. But like, there has just never been a massive sort of cultural conflict, to my knowledge, between the schools. And I think some of that is Notre Dame being a private religious institution. Some of it is Notre Dame not being in the Big Ten, obviously. Notre Dame has maintained rivalries with other Big Ten schools, Purdue to a certain extent, Michigan State, but never really Indiana. Some of it, frankly, is even, I think, a little bit the cultural distinction between Northern Indiana and Southern Indiana. Like, people from Northern Indiana identify culturally more with like Michigan, Chicago, that part of the Midwest.
Who made the push in, since you were here, obviously I wasn't, who made the push to sign the deal? You know, we'll see if those games happen for the 2030-31 series. Which side pushed for that?
I'm trying to remember that right now. Because when was it announced?
It wasn't a lot of, I did a search.
It was announced in April of 21. So, I mean, that would have been Tom Allen, and it would have been Scott Dolson, at least primarily, if not completely. You know, and that was also, remember that was at a time when
they were trying to beef up the schedule with Louisville and Notre Dame.
Well, when the Big Ten was requiring it. For a long time, the Big Ten had a rule that you had to play one Power 5 team in the non-conference. Notre Dame also counted that way. You could grandfather in some of the teams that had been in the Power 5 and then fell out, like the Cincinnati series. Obviously, Cincinnati's Power 4 again now, but you get my point. So it was probably a little bit like the appeal of the series. It was a little bit kind of like at the time the Big Ten sort of required that. So anyway, there is going to be, I suspect, in the national media, the strong push for this kind of like narrative of the rivalry and northern part of the state, southern part of the state, historic football program. Kind of what did Kurt Cignetti call them, the emerging superpower of college football. The enmity that exists between, for example, Indiana. Like if Indiana, I still think at some point in the next few years we're going to see Indiana play Kentucky in the Music City Bowl, and that will be a rivalry game.
You're just you won't let the Music City Bowl.
No, I've planted my flag in that one. It's staying there until we.
Now you're even calling the opponent. You're organizing the whole thing.
That will be a rivalry. Notre Dame, Indiana is not that, even though the two schools are in the same state. I think there are a host of reasons for that, and I'm not saying there's nobody out there that grew up an Indiana fan and wants to beat Notre Dame because they want to get one over on Notre Dame after years of losing out recruits and looking up at Notre Dame in the polls and whatever else. But yeah, I don't think it's a historic, like, cultural conflict in the way that you think about Indiana Purdue or the way you think about Indiana Kentucky.
Yeah, and that's kind of the sense I got. I just why it's hard to peg like who like why they sort of avoid each other throughout the years, why that they in football there never was. I mean, because obviously that Notre Dame did make a point to sort of have these rivalries in the Big Ten, but why did that not become like a regular sort of every 5-6 years they play at Indiana? Maybe that's sort of fascinating to me why that never developed, just because, like you said, it is a rarity to have so many sort of Power 5 type schools in the same state. But like I said, I thought the matchup with Texas in SEC country or Georgia before they won would have been sort of I think the more interesting matchup storyline wise. Just because I feel like there is a disconnect there that even though these teams are in the same state, it just doesn't feel like they spend much of the time. I think I said in the story, like much of the time on the same continent in college football. That it just feels very separated.
I put this comment up here just to address it real fast. Donnie Word said it would be cool to add a home and home series with Kentucky football. Indiana had one for years. They played for the Bourbon Barrel. They got rid of the trophy about 25 or so years ago, and they stopped playing the series in 2005 and never put it back on the schedule. Indiana won the last game. I was a freshman. I was at the game. That was like the year before Kentucky went on that great run with Rich Brooks, and I forget the quarterback's name. He played for I think he played for the Giants for a little while. That was like the beginning of that Kentucky team that wound up being kind of.
So really they get rid of the trophy completely? Like it's been banned and just destroyed, or like?
Well, so I'm going to look this up while we're talking. I think there was some sort of.
Was it stolen? Do you have it in your house?
No, there was. Well, this is from Wikipedia. So forgive me for this, but the two teams played for a trophy called the Bourbon Barrel from 1987 until both schools mutually agreed to retire the trophy in 1999. Following the alcohol-related death of a Kentucky football player. So that was, I mean, that's what Wikipedia says. And that's the story I've always been told. Obviously, I was not around for this. The story I have always been sort of given is that the Bourbon Barrel, like, I mean, it was something where it was one of those deals where they kind of made it up out of nowhere. It wasn't like the old Oaken Bucket where it had been around forever and legends about people stealing it and stuff. Like it was a relatively modern creation, and they got rid of it. I think they just got they just kind of got like there was a little bit of a do we want to have a trophy named after an alcohol thing, and even beyond maybe just an incident. But anyway,
this is a tangent. Greg, thank you. This is a tangent. He's on Music City Bowl, Kentucky. Like what? He's obviously tired.
In the Music City Bowl, they've forfeited their place in the college football playoff for an even more prestigious game. No, I mean I don't know. It just has never. There has never been like a really strong sort of, drive to it. And again, like there's never been a really, and I'm not being critical of Notre Dame here, please understand, but like there's never really been like a huge drive from Notre Dame to sort of identify with like Indianapolis and the central to southern part of the state in the same way. Like, for example, when the Crossroads Classic ended, and it's before your time, I don't know if you know what it is. It was a 4-team annual 2-game event in basketball up in Indianapolis. Notre Dame and Butler rotated playing IU and Purdue every year right around Christmas. It was a really cool event, always sold out Gainbridge Fieldhouse. They discontinued it just a few years ago. And the reason the first team to pull out was Notre Dame because they just didn't want to. And I don't remember the last time Notre Dame played at Lucas Oil Stadium, but it hasn't happened much. Whereas obviously we've seen Notre Dame play just this year at, I think, MetLife Stadium and then somewhere else too, maybe Philly. I think they played a game at Lincoln Financial. So, I mean, it's just like I think the identities have always been just they've made different sort of cultural choices, basically, in terms of how they wanted their athletics departments and certainly their football programs to sort of where they wanted them to fit, I guess. And, for whatever reason, there has never been a strong crossover.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating, and now obviously it'll be the next 2 weeks. People talking about it, and somebody mentioned that 91 game that they played was the first game that was broadcast as part of their Notre Dame's agreement with NBC. And I just saw a tweet that this will be the first game that broadcast from Notre Dame Stadium, not broadcast by NBC since 1990. So I mean, Indiana will be bookending that streak.
And that game, that 1991 game, was the start of the last season that ended with Indiana winning a bowl game. They went up to Notre Dame and they were breaking in that Bill Mallory had flown down with his defense coordinator Joe Novak to Miami to learn how to run the 4-3 defense from Jimmy Johnson, and they were breaking in the 4-3, and they had kind of a good first half and then lost control in the second half. Actually, I think Jerome Bettis kind of took control of that second half for Notre Dame, and they lost 49-27. But that was the beginning of the season that ended with the Copper Bowl win that was Indiana's last. I think the last question I have for you is, and it's an obvious one, and we've talked about it in different ways, but I think it is a little bit different when it's real. Like, how important is this for Indiana? Just in the sense that whatever happens, Indiana navigated a 12-team schedule. It had to overcome, everybody had obstacles to get here, whether it was losing the conference title game or your bad strength of schedule or playing a lot of tough teams or whatever. Indiana overcame what it needed to. I know Kurt Signetti was stumping for a home game last night on CBS, but one way or the other, to be in the college football playoff, there was a tweet making around the rounds this morning. Someone had posted a screen grab of what they were claiming was a bet they'd made in the preseason that Indiana was plus 20,000 to make the CFP. I assume it was in the preseason, and maybe it was early in the year, and the odds had come down a little bit. But then the point is, then the odds would have been even more extreme before Indiana started winning games. Just like, what does this mean for a program like this? Because we've seen Indiana have I don't even want to say a false start. They deserved what they got in 2019 and 2020. But we've seen Indiana sort of like try to punch through that wall recently and not be able to sustain it and come back to earth. And obviously there's always going to be the possibility that happens again here. But to me, there is a difference between going, to a Gator Bowl and then an Outback Bowl and having two really solid, successful seasons and going to the playoff and what it means, what it says about you to go to the playoff. I'm just curious, like, what you think this win or lose, 2 Fridays from now. What does this say about Indiana? Where does this take Indiana going forward?
So is the bowl streak, like the losing streak, still intact if they can't get to the Sugar Bowl and win? Then
I think that's fair.
is that
Yeah. I don't think you should count a playoff game but like here's the thing is what's more prestigious?
No. I mean, it'll be a postseason win. I mean, yeah.
Well, Music City was a bad example because it's obviously more prestigious. But all of the non-Music City Bowl bowls,
No, but I'm just being semantics. But in terms of what it means, now that you're there, is it disappointing that you don't win one? Like, is it? Do the expectations change so much? I certainly think if you talk to Kurt Signetti, he'll be disappointed if they don't make a run here, at least to get out of this first round. He's disappointed anytime he loses, or sounds at least like he is. But I mean, I think fans are grateful for what this team has accomplished, and I don't think you could take. I think you have to celebrate the historic nature of it. It's just something that's never happened in school history, and the most recent examples are pre 1970. So I mean, obviously this hasn't come around very often, but at the same time, that context isn't going to matter if you're not headed to the Sugar Bowl in 2 weeks' time. So I think that it'll be hard for fans initially to celebrate that, and for the players and the coaches. But I think that they won't be able to sort of have that feeling until there's some separation from the season, because I do think that you look at kind of this matchup on paper, that's favorable. They've got a decent draw here that you definitely feel like you got. I think it'd be disappointing if you don't at least win one, right? Like,
what do you think here's maybe a way to frame it, specifically for a fan base that has obviously been, incredibly invested in basketball for so long and is now trying to embrace football in the same way. Like,
I don't think trying. They've embraced.
No, but like in a long-term cultural way, trying to be good at it beyond just one season. I mean, again, I'll argue for the fact that for 20 years, Indiana went to one bowl game and had 3 5-win seasons. In the last 10 years, Indiana's been to 4 bowl games and a playoff first round and 2 more 5 and 7 seasons. Like, it is different to where it was for Indiana across 3 different coaches in the last decade. But like, what is the basketball equivalent of making the 12-team field? Is it the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight? Because I do think there's a difference between the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight.
I don't even think there is a comparison, really. I don't know. I just feel like that. I don't know that they correlate. Like, I feel like it'd be the Final Four almost. Where I don't know. Do you think that is a correlation? Like that there's sort of an equivalency there?
I think it's more the equivalent of the Elite Eight in the sense that, like, there's always some teams that just kind of like fall backward into the Sweet 16, and I'm not even talking about the Cinderellas. I'm talking about like, a 3 seed that beats a 14 and then winds up getting the 11 and not the 6, that kind of thing. But like the Elite Eight, to me, it's obviously it's not as good as the Final Four, but if you make the Elite Eight, it just sort of feels like basically you've put yourself at the table, and it's kind of like once you get to the Elite Eight, it's sort of like it's matchups, it's who's tired, it's can you get one guy hot at the right time, like you get coaches that have been like Sean Miller's been to so many Elite Eights and never a Final Four, and it's like, yeah, but you give yourself that opportunity that many times, that says something about you as a coach. I just think I think a 12-team playoff, obviously, if we're talking literally, it's splitting the difference between the 16 and 8. But a 12-team playoff to me bends more toward an Elite Eight, and really saying, like, no matter what else happens, this season was a real success. You're going to be disappointed if you get to an Elite. If you get to within one win of the Final Four and you don't go, there's always going to be a little bit of disappointment you're not going to be able to shake. But you're still going to be able to say, we were at that table in a way that virtually nobody else was. And from Indiana's perspective too, it's not like they were the last team in the field. I mean, like they were comfortably in. They were well ahead of Alabama. They were well ahead of SMU. the committee had no real objections, apparent objections at all, even last week, to just saying Indiana's in. We like Indiana. We're going to bring them into the field, and that's just how it goes. I just think, and I'm like putting up this comment from Shellcracker Lover saying football dwarfs basketball. There's no comparison. I'm not saying like basketball is somehow as important as football. I understand that culturally, financially, competitively, it's not. I'm just more sort of drawing comparisons. Indiana has sustained success in basketball across its history. Now it's trying to do the same in football. And I'm sort of trying to figure out for my own purpose, like contextually, what is the basketball equivalent of what Indiana's done this season, and therefore how it might try to build forward from here.
What is your thought before we go? Did the committee get it right in terms of their seating? You mentioned kind of how they viewed them. Did you listen to Signetti's comments yesterday? I mean, obviously,
I did. I heard most of them. I was like getting in the elevator at Lucas Oil to go up to the press box, and I saw he was on CBS. So I pulled my phone out and pulled on YouTube TV, and I heard him say that he was better looking than Nick Saban, and that they should have had a home game. So he was in fine form.
Should they have had a home game?
I just think you have to punish them somehow for the schedule they played. In the sense that I think they're one of the 12 most, well, really, let's say 10 most deserving teams in the country. To me, they are. But you do have to acknowledge that they did not play the same schedule that, for example, Georgia did.
If they had kept the Louisville game and won it, would they be hosting a playoff game?
Where is Louisville still ranked? I can't remember.
I do not know.
In the CFP and the college football playoff rankings, this is I think last week. Maybe no, this is this week's ranking. Louisville is not ranked. I think they'd still be out, personally. I think they'd maybe be a seed line or two up. But they still wouldn't have a ranked win.
Louisville's strength of record, I'm looking on ESPN sites, 25th in the country. They played the 23rd hardest schedule. They ranked 12th in FPI. I mean, they were pretty good analytics in terms of like the analytics and numbers of their season. I mean, they were a top 25 team, essentially, without being a top 25 team.
But the committee seems to put a lot of weight, and I think justifiably so, whether you agree with them or not, in its own rankings. Like, I think the committee is going to have to, if the committee is going to come out with a whole top 25, and you can argue about the flaws in the process that get them there, but if the committee's going to come out with a whole top 25, then there's an extent to which it's got to use its own top 25 as kind of a bar for saying who have you played.
See, the problem, and I think you're right. I think Donnie's right. I think they would have been ninth because they would have run in the roadblock that they lost to the Ohio State, which was the 8, right? Like they couldn't have gone above. So I mean,
frankly, I think
it's an interesting thing.
I think you'd rather be 10th at that point than 9th, because that means A, you don't have to go on the road to a team that, whatever the merits of that game, did beat you by 23 just 3 weeks ago, and B, you don't have to play Oregon in the second round.
Right.
If you get there, which, right. I mean, like, I got an up-close look at Oregon last night. My God, what a fast football team.
Yeah, no, they got a better path they got the path that you'd want, right? You know, I think if you're an Indiana fan. And so
I think the only more favorable one is maybe that 6-11 into the 3. But I don't think I think there's a lot of people looking at Penn State right now and saying Oregon should have tanked the Big Ten championship game, then Oregon could be the 6, and they'd have an easier path. Number one, I don't agree with that. But number two, like I would not underestimate Boise State. Like they probably should have beaten Oregon. They've got a Heisman, an almost certain Heisman finalist at running back. Obviously, culturally, that's a program that's done a lot of winning. You know, I don't know which of those 4 teams I would want in the quarterfinal. I mean, it might be Georgia, especially if Carson Beck isn't healthy. and they're having
that
to break
injury
in
looms large. Yeah, and it's not.
if they're having to break in if either Beck is limited or they're having to break in a new starter. And Stockton looked okay. I mean, he wasn't, he didn't look like he didn't know how to tie his shoes or anything, but he was not quite what Carson Beck has been at his best this season. I think that is fair to say. And it's, listen, again, we're talking about this, like, this is when you're playing for a national championship, there are no easy games. But if I look at those 4 quarterfinals, like, I wouldn't want Oregon. I would not want Arizona State right now because they look like a world beater. I think Boise State's a lot more dangerous than people are giving them credit for. And then Georgia in the Sugar Bowl is just going to be very difficult. Now, here is the final question. I know John Fisher has in the past been a devotee of the late Larry Munson, who would have been his counterpart at Georgia. If Indiana beats Notre Dame, do you think we can get Don to emulate Larry's famous call, "Look at the sugar falling from the sky"? Do you think we can get Don to do that? Do you think we can get him to go, "It's raining sugar. It's raining sugar"? Do you think
Maybe if you bought him a round of golf, you promised to.
I guess it'd probably have to be snowing sugar because I don't think it's going to be raining in South Bend. I think it's going to be a little cold for that.
But the Sugar Bowl is a wonderful trip. And Indiana fans should be rooting not only for their team but for the possibility to go to New Orleans.
It's almost as good as the Music City Bowl.
Almost, yes, that's right. Right. It's right there.
We're gonna leave it there. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. We'll obviously be back this week. We will talk some basketball this week. Hoosiers have their Big Ten opener tomorrow against Minnesota, so we'll have maybe some stuff to chew on coming out of that game and heading into the road game Friday at Nebraska. And then, of course, the big one next Friday night, 8 p.m. Friday, December 20th in South Bend, Indiana, Notre Dame in the first round of the college football playoff. To paraphrase Larry Munson again, I didn't see it coming. Neither did you. That's not what he said at all. He said, "I gave up. You did too." But I'm sure that if you'd asked Indiana fans in the preseason,
are you going to be able to cover the Music City Bowl and the first round of the playoffs? Is that going to be doable with your schedule?
Music City Bowl is usually after Christmas.
All right, so you're saying, well, so will that conflict?
Indiana has a chance to become the first 17-win team in college football history when
Indiana just shows up,
and then they play the Music City Bowl, and then they win the Sugar Bowl, and then they win the final. No, it's been an interesting season, and it's not over yet. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. It is, as I said, not over. We'll have a lot more in the next 2 weeks building up to this game. I'm sure a lot of you are excited. It's a fascinating story to watch unfold here near the end, for better or worse. Even if Indiana keeps winning, there is finally kind of a shelf life on this season, and it's going to be fascinating to see just how long it goes. He's Mike Niziolek from the Bloomington Herald-Times. I'm Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. Thank you so much for listening, for watching. This will be up on all your podcast channels fairly soon. But until then, we'll talk to you soon.